It is 3 a.m. and you are wide awake, not because of noise, not because of light, because your brain has just handed you in full color a conversation you had 11 years ago. The thing you said, the way their face changed. You did not ask for this memory. It arrived anyway, uninvited at the worst possible hour. You cringe. You pull the blanket over your face like that will somehow undo it. And then you ask yourself the same question you always ask in this exact moment. Why now? Why this memory out of every memory you have at 3 in the morning when you are the most powerless to do anything about it? You tell yourself it is random, bad luck, a glitch. But the real answer is far stranger. Your brain is not malfunctioning at 3 a.m. It is doing something it was built to do at the exact moment it is best equipped to do it, using a system that evolved millions of years before embarrassment even existed as a concept. To understand this, you first have to understand what silence actually does to your brain. During the day, your mind is occupied. You are solving problems, responding to people, reacting to a world that keeps interrupting you before any one thought can finish. But the moment external demands fall away, a different network switches on. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, and it was first mapped in detail by a scientist named Marcus Reichel in the early 2000s. Reichel found something counterintuitive using brain imaging. He expected the brain to go quiet during rest, the way a machine idles when nothing is asked of it. Instead, when people stopped focusing on an outward task, a specific set of regions lit up. Not less activity, more. This network handles self-reflection, memory retrieval, and imagining scenarios that are not currently happening, whether that means daydreaming it out tomorrow or replaying something from years ago. In other words, the moment your brain is no longer busy with the outside world, it turns its attention inward, toward you. And at 3 a.m., there is nothing left to distract it. This is why the embarrassing memory does not show up while you are making coffee or arguing with a coworker or scrolling through your phone. Your attention is already spoken for in those moments. It shows up in the dark, in the quiet, when your default mode network finally has the floor entirely to itself, with no meeting, no traffic, no conversation competing for the microphone. But why that memory specifically? Why the cringe and not the compliment someone gave you the same week? Your brain holds thousands of memories. It could resurface anything. Instead, it reaches almost every time for the one that still stings. Here, the psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema becomes relevant. In the 1990s, she studied a mental pattern she called rumination, the tendency to replay a negative event over and over rather than let it settle and pass. Her research found something uncomfortable about how this pattern actually functions. Rumination does not fix the problem it fixes on. It rarely leads to insight or resolution. It simply loops, extending the emotional sting long after the event itself has ended, and long after there is anything left to learn from it. Nolan Hoeksema also found that this looping tends to intensify specifically at night. During the day, ongoing tasks give your attention somewhere else to go, so a ruminative thought gets interrupted before it can spiral. At night, with nothing competing for your focus, a ruminative thought can run uninterrupted, again and again, like a song stuck on repeat with no one around to change the station. So your brain is not choosing the embarrassing memory at random. It is choosing the memory that still feels unresolved, the one your mind has quietly filed as unfinished business. And rumination is the mechanism that keeps pulling it back to the surface the instant nothing else is competing for your attention. There is a second piece to this puzzle, and it comes from sleep science rather than psychology. The neuroscientist Matthew Walker, who has spent decades studying the relationship between sleep and memory, has described something remarkable that happens during REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming occurs. During REM, a stress-related chemical called noradrenaline drops to its lowest level of the entire 24-hour cycle. Walker's research suggests this creates something close to an overnight therapy session. Emotional memories get replayed by the sleeping brain, but with the volume of the accompanying stress response turned almost all the way down. In theory, this should help you. You revisit the memory during sleep, but without the original sting fully attached to it. So by morning, it has faded into something you can recall calmly instead of something that still hurts to touch. But here's the catch, and it is the part almost nobody realizes. This overnight editing process depends on getting enough uninterrupted REM sleep for it to actually complete. If you are stressed, if your sleep is fragmented, if you wake at 3 a.m. instead of moving smoothly through a full sleep cycle, you can end up catching the memory mid-processing. You get the replay without the calming edit finished.
The raw footage plays and the soothing narration that was supposed to accompany it never finishes rendering. That is why the memory at 3 a.m. does not feel like a distant, faded thing. It feels fresh. It feels like it just happened yesterday, even if it happened a decade ago, because in a very real sense, your brain is still in the middle of trying to process it, and you have simply woken up in the middle of the edit. Think about what this means for the version of you lying there, staring at the ceiling. You are not weak, and you are not being punished by a broken brain. You have simply woken up inside two ancient systems that happen to be running at the same time. One system, the default mode network, only gets full uninterrupted access to your attention when the outside world goes quiet enough to let it through. The other system, memory consolidation during sleep, is actively trying to file away emotional experiences so they eventually stop hurting, but it needs a full uninterrupted stretch of time to finish that job properly. Neither of these systems evolved with modern embarrassment specifically in mind. They evolved to help your ancestors learn from mistakes that mattered enormously for survival. Saying the wrong thing to the wrong person in a small ancient tribe was not a minor social slip. It could mean exclusion. And exclusion in a world without supermarkets or locked doors could easily mean death. A brain that replayed social missteps relentlessly, that refused to let an awkward moment simply fade without extracting every lesson from it, was a brain that was less likely to repeat the same costly error twice. The unpleasant looping you feel now lying awake at 3 a.m. is a survival mechanism, still faithfully running, on a version of danger that no longer applies the way it once did. Your ancestors needed to remember in painful detail who they had wronged and how. You were only trying to fall back asleep before your alarm goes off in 4 hours. This is also part of why trying to reason your way out of the memory rarely works in the moment. You cannot out-argue a system that is not asking you for logic in the first place. It is not looking for you to prove point by point that the memory does not matter anymore. It is running an old automatic replay function that switches on the instant the room goes quiet enough for it to take over completely, regardless of how many times you remind yourself that nobody else even remembers what you said. There is a reason too why certain memories seem to have a kind of permanent residency in this rotation, showing up again and again across years, while others fade for good after a night or two. The ones that keep returning tend to share a common feature. They involve a moment where you felt evaluated by someone else, where your status or belonging felt momentarily at risk. That is precisely the category of event your ancient alarm system was built to flag as important, regardless of how trivial it looks to you now in the light of day. There is one more layer to this, and it explains why you cannot simply think your way to calm at 3 a.m. the way you might at 3 p.m. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning, perspective, and talking yourself down from a spiral, does not operate at constant strength around the clock. It follows its own rhythm, tied closely to your body's broader circadian cycle. In the deep overnight hours, activity in this region dips. The part of you that would normally step in and say that happened a decade ago, nobody remembers, you were 22, is quite literally running at reduced capacity while you need it most. Meanwhile, the emotional centers of your brain, the ones responsible for the raw feeling of dread and exposure, do not dim on the same schedule. So at 3 a.m. you are left with a strange imbalance. The alarm is at full volume. The reasoning system meant to quiet it has partially gone offline for the night. This is not a personal weakness or a character flaw. It is simply what happens when two systems with different internal clocks are both for a brief window out of sync with each other, and you happen to be conscious in the exact narrow window where that mismatch is most obvious. This also explains something else you may have noticed. The same memory that felt unbearable at 3 a.m. often feels manageable, even mildly funny by the time you are brushing your teeth the next morning. Nothing about the memory itself changed overnight. What changed is that daylight brought your reasoning systems back online, brought other tasks back to compete for your attention, and quieted the default mode network that had briefly been running the whole show. The memory did not get smaller. Your ability to hold it in proportion simply came back. So the next time you find yourself awake at 3 a.m., replaying something you said in a hallway a decade ago, or a joke that landed wrong, or a silence that stretched a second too long, you do not have to treat it as a personal failure. You are not broken, and you are not uniquely bad at letting things go. You are simply caught between an ancient alarm system that once kept your ancestors safe inside their tribe, and a nightly repair process that has not finished its work yet on this particular file. The silence did not create the memory. It only removed everything that was standing between you and it. And somewhere underneath the discomfort of that moment is a strange kind of reassurance. The same circuitry that will not let you forget your worst hallway conversation is the circuitry that once helped a version of you thousands of generations back survive long enough to have descendants at all. It is loud tonight. It is inconvenient tonight, but it was never trying to hurt you. It was only ever trying in its own outdated and clumsy way to keep you safe.